Good afternoon, Ms. Quick.
Good afternoon.
We'll let you get seated and just know that you can begin your remarks whenever you're ready to do so.
Great. Growing up, my dad worked 12-hour shifts at Firestone Tire Factory here in Des Moines. He worked 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. doing hard manual labor. As often as we could, we would get together as a family for dinner when he got home at about 6:30. After some of the exceptionally long, hot days in the factory, he had the same message for me. Heather, work hard and do well in school so when you grow up, you can have a career that matters to you and you don't have to work like I do. Now, I don't think he meant that to cut himself down, and I would never think that of my dad, who I know worked so hard to provide for our family. But that family dinner table sentiment has stuck with me throughout my entire life. The values instilled in me weren't to obtain the most money or seek the most power or try to gain the most influence. The message to me was to work hard to create opportunities to do work that mattered to me. And I've had to work hard. From my time as a teenager waitressing and working at Adventureland in the games department to today, where I spend many late nights researching cases on Westlaw. And that hard work has led to many meaningful opportunities in my career, and those opportunities have prepared me to serve on the Iowa Court of Appeals. I have been committed to the hard work of public service from day one in my legal career. Part of the reason I wanted to go into public service is because I wanted to do substantive work. There have been no training wheels in my career. I have handled close to 400 appeals. I have done over 60 appellate arguments, sometimes doing 3 or 4 oral arguments in a single week. The Court of Appeals is well known for its massive caseload, and a massive appellate caseload is all I have known. Now, I have appeared in appellate courts both in Iowa state and federal courts, but the skills applicable are the same and would be directly applicable to the work of an Iowa Court of Appeals judge. In every case, I must review the entire trial court record, do the necessary legal research, and write a clear and concise legal argument. I've done this several times, and I know that it's a skill that might seem like you can pick up easy, but it's always sometimes difficult to decipher what happened at the trial court. And I would be able to jump right into the work of an appellate judge because of this experience. Now, not everyone is an expert in every area of the law, and I am no exception to that. But my background has established that I have an ability to familiarize myself with different areas of the law as necessary to research legal issues and do so quickly. It's what I had to do as a law clerk for Judge Malloy. And even in my career now in criminal defense, it's not just run-of-the-mill arguments. I've done everything from constitutional challenges, questions of statutory interpretation, and complex evidentiary issues. I generally consider myself an appellate lawyer, but I've also been fortunate to represent clients at the trial court. I've done everything from criminal felony trials, I've done sentencings, I've appeared in state district court for eviction proceedings, I've also represented individuals at protective order domestic abuse hearings. This experience has reaffirmed the distinct roles appellate courts play in our system of justice compared to trial courts. I believe I would also enhance our already strong Court of Appeals. I would bring professional diversity to the court. We currently don't have any former public defenders on the bench, and I think having a variety of perspectives looking at and analyzing these cases can only make the opinions and the case law stronger. I also truly believe being an appellate public defender is one of the best preparations for being a judge. In my line of work, it is not about me, my feelings, my beliefs at all. Unlike most other attorneys, I don't get to choose my clients. I am constitutionally and professionally obligated to represent anyone who qualifies for our office's representation, no matter who they are or what they may have done. The only thing that goes into my practice is whether I believe it's a strong legal argument and it's something that would benefit my client. But I'm not solely just a public defender. I think many people think, well, I can consider things from every perspective, but I've actually had to do it. I've been both a prosecutor and a public defender. I've worked for a judge and with the only goal of accurately advising him on what the correct outcome should be in that case. I would also bring geographic diversity to the court, specifically more representation to the eastern side of the state. My husband grew up in Cedar Rapids. We've lived there for roughly 10 years, and we intend to stay. Overall, these opportunities and experiences I've had in my background have brought me here before you today, seeking what I believe is the ultimate opportunity to serve. In my practice, I am acutely aware that appellate decisions is not just an academic exercise. My work has not been for the faint of heart. I am the person who has to take the calls from my criminal defense clients and their family members, explaining sometimes very confusing appellate decisions and what they mean for that person's life. I've been the person who's had to walk out of a tough oral argument and meet with the victims of a crime and explain to them what the judge's questions mean and what happens next in the appeal process. I know the burden that this position entails. I know that no matter how big or small a legal issue might seem, it's going to have a major impact on Iowans and their families, including families like mine growing up around the dinner table, eating together after a long day of work. In short, this is not just the next step in my career. I don't seek this position lightly. I'm doing this because I feel I can do the work and do it well. Appeals are what I do, and they're what I love to do. So I thank you all so much for your time and meeting with me and for the opportunity to apply for the appellate bench. And I'd like to use the remaining of my time for questions.
And we'll start with Commissioner Hartkopf.
Heather, thank you very much for applying for the vacancy. Can you talk about your time clerking for Judge Malloy and what that taught you and how you can take that experience to be a good judge in the Court of Appeals should you be selected?
So there's many things I learned from that experience. The two big things I think that would be directly applicable to the work as an appellate judge were he made sure we kept in mind, not everyone's practice is the same. We heard cases from really big fancy law firms who had all the resources, and we heard cases from solo practitioners in small towns in Iowa, Minnesota, and wherever. And he made sure we treated every case and every argument with respect and understood that everyone's practice and their resources weren't the same. But the big thing I learned from him and would take to the bench is he's obviously distinguished, intelligent, but what people know him for is how he treats people. And that matters. I think it matters exceptionally as someone like myself who has driven to oral arguments and knows that I'm probably not going to win, but have someone who treats me with respect, asks intelligent questions, and is just fair and kind makes a big difference for how the attorney feels about the work and just how we view the bench in general.
Commissioner Spies.
Well, I feel kind of sheepish asking any questions. I've known about you for all of your professional life. And actually, I'm kind of intimidated because the thought of having you on the bench and then having me in oral arguments and oh my God, what's she thinking now? But setting that anxiety aside, what role did Judge Malloy plays in oral argument? And I know that you would be sitting in the back of the courtroom during an oral argument and then you would confer with the judge afterwards. And how much weight did Judge Malloy and how much weight would you put on oral argument? And do you?
I think I do, and I think he did significantly as well. And I think his role and how he viewed, from what I could see sitting in the back with the other clerks, was he really wanted to give the attorneys an opportunity and the chance to shine and to really make their arguments. And he also used it as an opportunity to make sure he understood what that argument was. It wasn't trying to stump them or have a gotcha moment. It was really a conversation to try to make sure that the court understood the case and that the attorney felt like they could put their best foot forward. And I think that's valuable.
I'll take that tip, thanks.
Commissioner Hanson.
Thank you so much for applying. If a case required you to learn about a specific industry or a subject matter that you were not familiar with, how would you go about doing this?
So in that circumstance, I would probably start with going to some of the other judges on the court, seeing if they have experience with that industry and seeing if they can provide some background that I might not have, and try and familiarize myself with that as much as possible. But other than that, just generally Google. I think Google's always a great place to start. But yeah.
Commissioner Stanger,
Thank you for your application, Ms. Quick. I have no questions today.
Commissioner Picklep,
No questions, thank you.
Commissioner Samorov.
What do you think the biggest difference is in terms of mindset between when you were working as a prosecutor versus working as a appellate defender, and how do you think that's going to help you in an appellate court setting?
Well, I think as a prosecutor, you shouldn't think about things of, I'm supposed to win, right? Your goal and what we say when we're prosecutors, and we should mean, is that it's about justice. And I know I had it, and it was rare, where I had situations where I was reviewing the file and I'd look at the case law and I'm like, think, this is wrong. Like this, one instance I'm remembering was there was an order of restitution for something that wasn't allowed under the statute. And after talking with the county attorney and talking with my boss, realized it was wrong. And I think my role then as a prosecutor was to acknowledge that this was an error and not to try and argue something just to argue it. Now, the role as a defense attorney is, you're still doing justice, but your goal is representing that client, your client, to the best of your ability and making sure they understand what is happening and know that every step of the way they have someone who is on their side, advocating them and helping them through what is a very daunting process.
Commissioner Roberts.
Heather, you have a lot of appellate experience. I think just by the numbers alone, it seems like you probably are the top of the list of 16. I think I read somewhere in your application too that over the last 8 years or so, there's maybe been nobody in the 8th Circuit that's had as many oral arguments as you, something to that effect. So I think you put it sort of appropriately that you're an appellate lawyer.
Right.
Why do you think that appellate experience is so helpful or important to your application?
I think when you do that much appellate work, you're very aware of the role of an appellate court. And I've seen it, I've been in the oral arguments where trial attorneys come in and they're not used to that appellate experience and they start making arguments like a trial attorney. It's like, that's not what we do here. The role of this court is very different, right? It is very limited to legal errors. And I have to explain to my clients sometime, we can't just argue everything that went wrong and try and raise everything that you feel was unjust. It's really about legal errors that impacted, in my case, in my work, your right to a fair trial or your right to a reasonable sentence. And I know that because this is the court that I practiced in. So understanding, in some ways, limitations, but maybe another way is to say the unique role of an appellate court.
Commissioner Schnur.
Kind of build off that, how would that affect your, ability is not the right word, but how would that affect or inform your review of jury trials and your experience as, your vast experience as an appellate attorney? Talk about that, please.
I think, and that's a reason I've tried to do some trial work, because it is so different. But one thing I keep in mind, because I know that the good appellate judges are keeping it on their mind, is I wasn't there. A cold transcript can only tell you so much. And as far as the credibility findings, you can't see a witness's demeanor or you can't see how they're reacting to questions physically. And I think having done so much appellate work and knowing that has informed how I practice and think about the best arguments I can make for my client. And it would inform how I served on the bench. Because we have great district court judges, and they have to make what are often discretionary, tough calls. And keeping in mind that they were the ones that were there, seeing the evidence come in, hearing the testimony is crucial, I think, for any appellate judge.
Thank you.
Commissioner Hoiting.
I think it's maybe not controversial to say that there are really good district court judges who would make not great appellate court judges or maybe average appellate court judges. There are really great appellate court judges who would make average or just okay district court judges. What do you think makes an appellate court judge distinct and special and perhaps better in that role? And what should we be looking for as we try to find an appellate court judge?
I think in general, the best quality that someone can bring to the appellate bench is an open mind. Someone who treats everyone with respect and is open to every argument and position that's brought before them. But I think what really distinguishes the work of an appellate judge from maybe other positions, especially on this court, is the writing skills. I think it's so crucial to have solid writers on the court, and I think most people could write something and write it well if they had infinite amount of time and lots of resources, but it's about someone who has shown the capability to write and write well and do so when they have a heavy caseload, because these opinions aren't just relied upon, even more so at the appellate level than at the district court level. These opinions are relied on by lots of folks outside of the parties and the individuals in that case. So someone who can write clearly and concisely so that not only the individuals in that appeal know why the appellate court ruled the way they did, but the attorneys who are going to rely on it in their own practice and the district court judges can as well.
Thank you.
Commissioner Hoyt,
No questions, thank you.
Commissioner Parrish.
Ms. Quick, you didn't share with commissioners that your mother was a court attendant, one of the best in Polk County, and each time she worked for a judge, the judge got a promotion. And that's a true story. But let me ask you this. During all of the different the appeals that you've done, what have you learned from the experience? And all of us who've done this know how difficult it is to handle appeals and the disappointments when we don't get the victories that we think our client deserves. So what experiences, what have you learned from that experience that you can bring to the Court of Appeal?
I think what I have learned is how great it is to have good coworkers and people who you can come back to and who not only support you so that even when you have a tough loss or you have a tough case, they rally around you so that you come back and continue to fight. I've lost, you expect to lose a lot of cases up to the public defender, but I've also lost some really tough cases. And just knowing that I have to come back and reassess, figure out if there's something that went wrong and maybe how I can do better the next time. But just the importance of having great colleagues that you can lean on and help you out through those tough times is crucial.
Thank you.
Commissioner Henderson,
No questions, thank you.
Commissioner Marquardt.
Heather, thank you first for your application. You talked about having to make decisions when you get the trial transcript. Can you talk about your decision-making process when you're trying to figure out what it is you think would be best to appeal and how those skills could transfer to the Court of Appeals?
Right. So it's not about, and again, sometimes my clients disagree, but it's not about raising any potential argument that you possibly could. And it's one of the first things I heard as an appellate attorney was, if you raise a lot of issues, we're going to think they're all weak. Focus on the strongest ones that you have. And I think that would translate to how I worked as a judge and keeping it short and sweet and focusing on what the strongest points are to make. Part of it also as well as what I do is I have never filed an appeal without talking to my client. Because again, it's not just what's a good argument, what sounds like it might do well. I need to make sure in every case that my client understands the consequences of, if we win on this issue, if we argued this, you might get a new trial. Is that something you want to push for? Or if we argue for this, you'll go back for resentencing. And at least in the federal system, it's no guarantee of a lower sentence, but we can try it. And because at the end of the day, and I tell my clients this, it's not my life, it is your life. I can advise you on what the strongest arguments are, but I want to make sure you understand what would happen depending on how the court rules. So that, of course, in what I do now is a major factor.
And our time is up, so we appreciate your application and wish you all the best.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.